guys, it's me, Passport Bro Visuals, back at it with another one, and yeah, so this topic is going to be about basically a reaction to, it's going to be more update on Floyd and his situation down in Brazil, but it's also going to be about a reaction to J Rello. J Rello made a surprise appearance on this guy's channel, and he was basically asking him about, should Floyd flip, should he snitch? And J Rello, he said, no, he shouldn't snitch, despite the situation is a horrible, situation. It's bad, but he shouldn't snitch. And that's what he was saying. And, that's my reaction, and I just wanted to say, as far as my reaction to it, it's total BS on J Rello's side, and it just really shows the low-hanging fruit within the Passport Bro space, even though Floyd is I call him a Passport Bro associate, or affiliate. He never claimed to be a Passport Bro, but he's an associate, and this just makes it even worse, and it speaks to how many guys in the Passport Bro space are just really about self. You want the group, but you want to be about self independently at the same time. Which again speaks to why BMT doesn't really hold guys accountable. He holds them accountable, he holds them accountable from a distance, as far as like, well, that's just that person over there, whatever, But since you gotta protect the brand, because he trademarked the whole Passport Bro name and everything, he's got to defend it. But like I say, everybody in that space, not all of them, but a lot of them is just mostly about self. We got guys fighting over, prostitutes over there, sex workers, fighting over them, just like you dudes, niggas in the street. And that's what, guys really want. You want to complain about those same guys who get the girls that you wanted. But you want to carry on the same way, just overseas as them, what I'm saying? And that makes the space, really look bad. But, J Rello is just foul. And, I don't know if it'll help Floyd per se, but yeah, Floyd should snitch. Is it going to be anybody on the Passport Bro side? No, probably not. But it will be some weirdo, white guys or black guys or whoever type of guys that he got hooked up with, that he's feeling with doing this type of stuff. Which I think would be good for him to snitch, at least get those people off the street, regardless if it help, Floyd or not. But J Rello, he's just a piece of shit, and he knows the heat is up as far as being asked that question. As far as him saying, he shouldn't snitch, but either way, it just shows that he knows that the heat is on, and people are, paying attention to this Passport Bro thing. Because like I said, he's a kooky, he's an ex-con, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, he just wants to go overseas and, trick on women. But, that was the goal of some of the low-hanging fruit as far as the Passport Bros, because they just want to get monetized, and, get monetized and be overseas with the ladies, and, get the money and live overseas. And that monetization from the YouTube, it'll pay for their lifestyle. It'll basically pay for their lifestyle, and that's what they wanted. Even someone as low as J Rello, he's still fighting, to achieve that, despite his problems. But yeah, I think Floyd, should snitch. It's not going to really probably help Floyd. It may help him a little bit, but, the best thing to do, is just to, snitch. Get more people like him off the streets. I don't think necessarily Floyd was necessarily engaging with minors in that way, but I will say he was most likely probably trafficking, exploiting them. But if you're going to exploit them and all that sort of stuff, traffic them, that if you're doing that, then that could eventually lead to you engaging with minors. You know what I'm saying? But he's always been questionable. I know one of his lives, a few times somebody asked about him in a situation with some girl, a minor, back in the States before he got on YouTube, which I think he had this issue before. So, he's been had this sort of problem. But I think it stems from, like I say, he's a black guy. He's not that really attractive. He has a funny voice or whatever. He's not the most suave, cool type of brother, And I'm 35, so he's 30, so I know, especially back then, the joking on you sort of thing and all that sort of stuff. I understand that was really rough. Back then it was pretty much unforgiving. But he chose to sink within himself and not look outside of himself and look at his flaws, but look at other people's perspectives and all that sort of stuff. And that's what I think led him to eventually entertain the idea of messing with minors, because when you mess with minors, it's wrong, but at the same time they don't know, they're impressionable. You know what I'm saying? So I think he's been kind of low-key slick with it, over the years. But, he's still very young, which is crazy because, as far as like him, he's young himself, he's getting involved in that sort of stuff, And, Austin has to take responsibility because he brought him into the fold. He brought him into the fold. He can't control what Floyd do, sure, but, he still brought him into the fold. And he has to take accountability for it. And I think they're going to definitely be looking at him in Brazil. Because like I said, Floyd got arrested in Brazil, and Austin had this situation in Brazil, and that's always been the place for Floyd, even for Austin, was Brazil. And the fact that he, like I said, he messed it up and all that sort of stuff with what he did, he can't go back to Brazil, and that's all on Austin. But the fact now that Floyd did what he did, now he got caught in Brazil, everybody's gonna be looking per se the passport bros, and I think he's next as far as them looking into him. I don't think he did anything necessarily nefarious in that way, but again, he still brought in Floyd, for what it's worth, and he was still kicking with Floyd, and even when he so-called denounced the passport bros and left, he had this little hiatus from Floyd. He still eventually kind of linked up with him again for a while. But like I said in my last video, as far as gatekeeping doesn't always mean excluding somebody. Gatekeeping also means keeping somebody in the fold, in a fold in order to keep them from getting into too much trouble. You know what I'm saying? Keeping people from getting into too much trouble. And that's what I think the passport bros' biggest fault is with Floyd. You know what I'm saying? Because I really do think, like with J Rello, when he went to Thailand that first time, it should have been zoomed to Thailand, and it should have been Chocolate Man in Thailand. Those guys specifically, I know just like Rico Reckless is saying, or Rico been saying, they were just trying to protect, their brand and build it up. But sometimes you got to bring someone like that, like a J Rello, into the fold just to keep him, keep an eye on him, kind of babysit him, keep him enough out of trouble. And that's what they should have did when it came to J Rello. You know what I'm saying? Trying to have him distance off, leave him alone. He could have gotten some serious trouble and messed it up then for the passport bros. You know what I'm saying? Back then at that point. You know what I'm saying? But that's kind of what that happens. But like I said, you gotta try to gatekeep. And sometimes that means keeping people in the fold. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I think they should have did. But as far as J Rello, he's just straight foul. And I don't think J Rello did that sort of stuff. I don't think he did it. But I think he don't want nobody to snitch because he's going to make a move. He already said he's going to try to make another flight trip in January, but that might get pushed back because of the Floyd situation. He might do something in the summertime, June or something. It might be his best bet, to kind of let everything kind of die down. But him throwing him under the bus, that just makes the passport bros as a whole look even more bad. Simply because it looks like that you condone this sort of behavior. And I think that's the biggest problem with J Rello saying that, and that's a bad look. You know what I'm saying? Because not all them guys are doing that sort of stuff. Even guys who just trick on women, like O'Shea Duke Jackson. You know, he's not a pedophile, but he just tricks off on women. That's what O'Shea Duke Jackson does. He's just a trick. He's not best either. He's problematic also. Now, he don't know what he talking about, but at the same time, it's like sometimes like I say, you gotta. The best way to protect it is sometimes you gotta keep them in a fold to keep them from causing more problems outside. You know, that's called the community. You know, and the Pastor Bro lost it very much early on, and it makes sense because you came up out of COVID, you exploded after COVID. It made sense. Of course, they're going to attract some people eventually like a J Rello, because like I said, he's an ex-con. You know, of course he's struggling himself as an ex-con. So the fact that he even looking for a simple vacation or whatever to get away speaks to how bad it was as far as COVID and his own personal life. You know, but as far as with that is said, with Floyd, Floyd, maybe Floyd was touched or something like that or whatever, but maybe he witnessed something that led him down that path. I think he was, picked on enough by the females to a certain point. I think he has a very high level of insecurity about himself. I think it eventually pulled him into that framework, into that way of thinking and going down that sort of dark path, if you will. I think that's kind of what happened with Floyd, because like I said, there's been some questionable stuff, even, back when he first came onto YouTube, when it came to, his background. Like I said, he's been arrested multiple times, disturbing the peace or whatever, harassing police, and all that. So, but there's been some questionable stuff with some girls that people mentioned it, online. So, like I said, because he's in jail now, people are definitely going to do their investigations and try to figure something out as far as exposing that about Floyd. And I do think he probably dabbled in sort of stuff before. He may have initially left the States because of it, when he hooked up with Floyd that very first time, you know what I'm saying? So, but like I said, I also think you got to take some of the blame, because you brought him to the fold, you brought him to Brazil, and you brought him to Thailand after you got in trouble in Brazil. You went to Thailand, and eventually you brought him, so, you know what I'm saying? So that's, there's that right there. But, yeah, so also, come to J Rello, J Rello shouldn't have said that snitching thing, that doesn't matter. That just shows what it shows about him and the type of people that he like to be around, you know what I'm saying? He's the type of person to be, a girl might get touched or something like that, he in another room, and he don't say nothing about it. Because you don't say that, you should, try to assault the person, You should try to assault the person, try to, call the police or something like that. He didn't do that, and that makes him look bad with his case that he had back in Indiana with that robbery and that woman. It makes me question, maybe he did, know that his homie was doing that or let him do it or whatever. That's a bad look. And that was an opportunity for him, a missed opportunity for him to kind of when it comes to this sort of behavior, you should snitch. Because I think he actually did snitch himself on the homie, what I'm saying, in regards to that, Because that homie, he's still in prison. So, but like I said, this just speaks volumes about who J Rello is, the type of person he is, the type of low vibration or low moral type of people he like to be around, and what he is, you know what I'm saying? So, but yeah, as far as people who should, as far as anybody that know Floyd, and was involved or know what he's doing to other people, they should, he should snitch on him. I think they should snitch, and you should snitch and try to get more off the streets, you know what I'm saying? Especially Floyd. So, but as far as I think Floyd would probably have to snitch I think he will. I don't know. I don't know per se as far as how that looks for him getting out of the situation, you know. But if Floyd can do one little good thing, then that would have to be, like I said, snitching, getting more of these people off the streets. Like I said, there was a time, haters wise, he wasn't really on YouTube for a while, and I think that was because he was sitting up there, probably meeting some of these people online and stuff like that, and I think he got hooked up with them. So by the time he do snitch, if he were to snitch, I don't think I don't think it'll be anybody on the Passport Road lane per se. I don't think nobody can involved, because he did kind of somewhat keep his distance from the space, and now we see why. You know what I'm saying? But I think like I said, those whoever he hooked up with, those people he was involved with, they're not Passport Bros. Probably most likely some white guys, maybe one black guy or so here or there. But I think like I said, he did kind of pull away from the space. He was talking a lot about with Brazil and Colombia, specifically Brazil. But I think he got hooked up with some foreigners, and I think that's how he's been, supporting himself money-wise. When it comes to this. But like I said, he never really had a job. He probably worked one time that we know of, but like I said, that was the goal. Get monetized on YouTube, live overseas, and have your fan base paid. Like I said, even with Austin, I wouldn't be surprised if his dad flipped him some money for some months. Just to keep it floating until you get the channel straight. You know what I'm saying? I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case with him. So, but yeah, that's my thoughts on it. I'm gonna catch you guys on the next one.